よし。これか。へいへいへいへいへい。仕事していけiPod。AirPods。AirPods Pro 仕事してはいはいはい、OK、OK。Neuroscientists, science, brain. I want to conduct simple experiments using electrodes, 3% the brain of a group of depressed women in the way that cause pleasure feelings. The unhappy women came to know her. Indeed, their mood improved, at least for a short time. But after the experiment, the women seemed to have fallen in love with the experimenters. A few positive specialists are now beginning to realize that such experiments present far more of a threat to human dignity and freedom than the cloning is the subject of heated public debate, with public complete ban. Yet when it comes to neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of mild experiment. Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote-controlled rats might not even consider the possibility that the chain could be done to create human program to obey. If asked to guess which group of scientists is most likely to be responsible in the future for changing the essential nature of humanity, most people may suggest the geneticists. In fact, neuroscience presents a greater and much more immediate threat. Moreover, it is a threat that is largely ignored by policymakers and the public, who seem mainly concerned with fantastic images of genetic manipulation. Scientists who study the human brain once conducted simple experiments. Using X-rays, they massage the brain of a group of depressed women in ways that cause pleasure or feelings. The unhappy women came to know her. Indeed, their moods improved, at least for a short time. But after the experiments, the women seemed to have fallen in love with the experimenters. A few process specialists. Hey. Specialists now beginning to seem to have fallen in love with experimenters. A few policy science specialists are now beginning to realize that such experiments present far more of a threat to human dignity and freedom than, uh, than there's experiments present far more of a threat to human dignity and freedom than the genetic cloning. Cloning is a subject to heated public debate, with proposals for its ban. Yet, when it comes to neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of mind experiments. Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote control of drugs might not even oh Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote control rats might might not even might not even consider 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 use brain or ordering technique to create remote control rats might not even consider the possibility that the same could be done to create human program to obey or be toy fast to Yes, which group of scientists is most likely to be responsible in the future for changing the essential nature of humanity? Most people may suggest the geneticists. In fact, neuroscientists present a greater and much more immediate threat. Moreover, it is a threat that is largely ignored by policymakers and the public, who seem to be mainly concerned with fantastic images of genetic manipulation. Neuroscientists, scientists who study the human brain, once conducted a simple experiment. Using electrodes, they massaged the brain of a group of depressed women in way おっと、なんかざっとなぁ。で、unhappy. おー、全然進んでない。Using electrodes, they massage the brain group of depressed women in the ways that in the ways in the ways in in ways that cause pleasurable feelings. Experiment using electrode to massage the brain of a group of depressed women in ways that cause in ways that cause pleasurable feelings. Electrodes that massage the brain group of depressed women in ways that cause pleasurable feelings. Young happy women came to no harm. Indeed, their moods improved, at least for a short time. But after the experience, the women seemed to have fallen in love with the experimenters. A few places special. なんでここバグってんだけど。えさっき大丈夫だったよな。怖っ。頼むわ。なんか、バグるな。Now we begin to realize that such experiment presents far more of a threat to human dignity and freedom than the genetic cloning. Cloning is a subject to heated public debate, with proposal for complete ban. Yet, when it comes to neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of... なんでバッテリーがないのか。いやーもうやだなー。あるやん、バッテリー。iOS の更新来てる。何これ。なんかやだな。うん。うん。
who use a brain on
Dignity agrees that the genetic cloning is a subject in human public debate, with a proposal for complete ban. Yet, when it comes to neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of mind experiment. Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote-controlled rats might not even consider the possibility that the same could be done to create human programmed to obey. If asked to guess which group of scientists is most likely to be responsible in the future for changing the essential nature of humanity, most people might suggest geneticists. In fact, neuroscience presents a greater and much more immediate threat. Moreover, it is a threat that is largely ignored by policymakers and the public, who seemed mainly concerned with fantastic images of genetic manipulation. Scientists who study the human brain once conduct simple experiments. Using electrodes, they massage the brain of a group of diverse women in ways that cause pleasurable feelings. The unhappy women came to harm no harm. Indeed, the mood improved, at least for a short time. But after the experiment, the women seemed to have fallen in love with the experimenter. A few policy specialists are now beginning to realize that such experiments present far more of a threat to human dignity and freedom than does genetic cloning. Cloning is a subject of huge public debate, with the proposal for complete ban. Yet, when it comes to the neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of mind experiment. Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote-control rats might not even consider the possibility that the same could be done to create human programmed to obey. If asked to guess which group of scientists is most likely to be responsible in the future for changing the essential nature of humanity, most people might suggest geneticists. In fact, neuroscience presents a greater and much more immediate threat. Moreover, it is a threat that is largely ignored by policymakers and the public, who seem mainly concerned with the fantastic images of genetic manipulation. Scientists that who study the human brain once conduct a simple experiment. Using electrodes, they massage the brain of a group of diverse women in ways that cause pleasurable feeling. The unhappy women came to no harm. Indeed, they were improved, at least for a short time. But after the experiments, the women seemed to have fallen in love with the experimenters. A few policy specialists are now beginning to realize that such experiments present far more of a threat to human dignity and freedom than the danger cloning. Cloning is subject to huge public debate, with proposal for complete ban. Yet, when it comes to neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of mind experiments. Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote-controlled rats might not even consider the possibility that the same could be done to create humans programmed to obey. If asked to guess which group of scientists is most likely to be responsible in the future for changing the essential nature of humanity, most people might suggest geneticists. In fact, neuroscience presents a greater and much more immediate threat. Moreover, it is a threat that is largely ignored by policymakers and public, who seem mainly concerned with fantastic images of genetic manipulation. Ah, ah, ah. Years after birth, the child remains largely helpless, and during this time it can hardly do anything for else at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish in our life, as we do it at any age when we can anything else. Moreover, it is the one thing that children do better than adults. Any physically normal child will learn perfectly the language surrounding it, whereas hardly any adult can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire their first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and reinforcement. From this view, child simply imitated what the grown-ups are saying. It produces a good imitation. The parent gets worried with a pride and smiles. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes steadily better, until they finally no different from it, and child has learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language studies in recent years has been the demonstration that this imitation and reinforcement model is totally and hopelessly wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they cannot possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out ああ、そっか、俺読めないやつだ。It turns out まではいけたけど。For years after birth, the child remains largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for itself at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish in our entire life, and we do it at an age when we can hardly do anything else. Moreover, it is the one thing that children do better than adults. Any physically normal child will learn perfectly the language surrounding it, whereas hardly any adult can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire their first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition, imitation, and reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tries to imitate what the grown-ups are saying. If it produces a good imitation, it perhaps gets well with a face and smile. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of other speech became steadily better, until they were finally no different from it, and the child had learned the language. One of the most profound achievements of language studies in recent years has been a demonstration that the imitation and reinforcement model is totally and hopelessly wrong. Not only do children not learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about how children actually do learn language, and it turns out that the way they do it is far more fascinating than simple imitative imitation hypothesis would suggest. Hmm. For years after birth, the child remains largely helpless and utterly dependent on its parents for survival. During this time, it can hardly do anything for else at all, except for one thing: it can learn language. The acquisition of language is arguably the most astonishing and wonderful feat we accomplish on the we do it. Moreover, it is the one thing that children do better than adults. A physically normal child will learn perfectly the language surrounding it, whereas hardly any adults can perform the same feat. How do children do this? How do they acquire their first language? Until not so many years ago, many people were inclined to try to explain language acquisition in terms of imitation and for reinforcement. In this view, the child simply tried to imitate what the grown-ups were saying. If it produces a good imitation, it happens to get rewarded with praise and smiles. If it produces a poor imitation, it gets discouraged by frowns or corrections. Consequently, the imitation of adult speech becomes steadily better, until it finally no different from it, and the child has learned language. Language studies in recent years has been a demonstration that imitation and reinforcement model is totally and hopelessly wrong. Not only do children learn language in this way, they couldn't possibly learn it in such a way. It would be literally impossible. We now know a good deal about the children actually do language. It's far more fascinating than simple-minded imitation hypothesis would suggest. Ah, I got them. Scientists who study the human brain once conducted a simple experiment. Using electrodes, they massaged the brain of a group of depressed women in ways that caused pleasurable feelings. The unhappy one came to no harm. Indeed, the mood improved, at least for a short time. But after the experiment, the woman seemed to have fallen in love with the experimenters. A few policy specialists are now beginning to realize that such experiments present far more a threat to human dignity and freedom than does genetic cloning. Cloning is a subject to heated public debate with purple. Yet, when it comes to neuroscience, no government policy exists to stop any kind of mind experiments. Scientists who use a brain-altering technique to create remote control rats might not even consider the possibility that the same could be done to a human programmed to obey. If asked to guess which group of scientists is most likely to be responsible in the future for changing the essential nature of humanity, most people may suggest that geneticists. In fact, neuroscientists present a greater and much more immediate threat. Moreover, it is a threat that is largely ignored by policymakers and the public, who seem mainly concerned with those fantastic images of genetic manipulation. Oh, oh, it's